host, Ralph Newell, and today we will be talking with Dr. Courtney Brown. She's the Vice President of Impact and Planning for the Lumina Foundation. We at Diverse have had a long relationship with the Lumina Foundation, and I have to mention Jamie Marasotis. Courtney, we've been covering you all since inception in 2000. And so for those in our audience who don't know about the Lumina Foundation, could you just please give us your quick elevator pitch on what you guys do?
Absolutely. And it's great to be with you today, Ralph, and your audience. So Lumina Foundation has been around, as you said, since about 2000, and we focus all of our efforts on post-secondary education. More specifically, we want to ensure that all Americans, especially Black, Latino, Hispanic, and Native Americans, have the opportunity to access and succeed in education beyond high school.
I didn't know you guys had embarked on this, I guess, sort of as an overarching goal. I was on your website the other day and I was reading that Lumina has a goal of having 60% of our nation to have more than a high school diploma by 2025. So when I first read it, I thought it said 60% of the country to have a high school diploma. I was like, man, I could have sworn we were already there. But reading it, I was like, oh, okay, I see where you're going. So it really just got me thinking about it. So my question to you is like, so how are we progressing towards you guys reaching that goal? And where were we when you started benchmarking it?
Yeah, great question. So as you said, we have a 60% goal by 2025, and that includes all high quality credentials beyond high school, including certificates, certifications, and associate degrees and higher. Each person is only counted once. We don't double count those. When we set the goal in 2008, the country sat at about 38%, and that's 38% of Americans held between 25 and 64 held a degree. That was associate's degree and higher. And even though we had certificates and certifications as a part of that goal, we had no way to count them in 2008. So the 38% only included associate degrees and higher. Today, we sit at almost 54%. So we've made an incredible progress. Now, some of that was because we were able to count now. We can count certificates and certifications, and those together account about 8%. But the rest of it is an increase in degrees. So we have made tremendous progress in the last 15 years. At 54%, we're knocking at the door of that 60%. And if we actually look at the younger population, so those people that are 25 to 34, they're already at 56%, which is incredible progress because they too started just under 38% in 2008. So we're making progress. We're chipping away there.
Okay, interesting you say that, because I was thinking about this and I'm like, okay, is this something that's going to, in some regards, naturally take care of itself as our senior population, if you will, passes away?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe, but probably not. I don't see a great deal of difference in attainment in age groups if we look at the 40s, 50s, 60s. And part of the issue that we really had to deal with in 2008 when we set the goal is that 25 to 34-year-old population actually had a lower attainment rate than the 25 to 64. So they were actually less educated than our older Americans. So there's been a tremendous progress that's gone on in the higher ed field over the last 20 plus years to really focus on those younger population, which is helping to move, increase a higher attainment in our country. One of the reasons that we set the goal in 2008 is when we looked at what the economy needed. We first knew that at least 60% of the jobs were going to require some form of post-secondary education, and America just wasn't there yet. So that was goal one. The other thing we noticed is that countries around the world had increased attainment tremendously. The US had fallen to like 12th or 14th in the world with regards to attainment. And the way they did it was educating their younger populations. So their 25 to 34-year-old attainment rate was way higher and continues to be higher than the United States. And so our focus and doubling down on that population is really paying off.
It's interesting, but I mean, like I'm thinking anecdotally about my family and where things are and people I'm associated with. So I'm kind of surprised by that those numbers that you're saying. Because most people say, "Oh, I want my children to have more education than I had," and so forth. People have more access. So why was that age group behind?
It's not necessarily that they were behind. They just had stayed flat for years. And nobody had really done anything about it. And the increase that we saw, that tiny bit, I mean, the 25 to 64 were just a teeny bit higher than the 25 to 34. So they were all pretty equal. But the US just hadn't done a lot. We kind of, created this incredible higher education system in the 50s and 60s, and then didn't really do anything else about it. The other issue is we didn't open up access. It was a pretty closed system to a pretty elite population. And so the most important thing we have done is ensure access and success to more people of color, to low-income individuals, to a whole host of people, to give them the opportunity to access and succeed post-secondary education, which is absolutely where we need to be going. We haven't gotten to this, but we're making tremendous progress toward the goal. As I said, we're still struggling to increase attainment for Americans of color. So when I said that we're at 54% as a nation, the problem is when I disaggregate that by race, ethnicity, and then this is just for degrees and higher. The nation for associate degrees and higher sits at about 46%. Roughly 50% of white Americans between 25 and 64 have an associate's degree or higher. The problem that we really need to address, and we are addressing, but we need to double down even more, is that we see Black attainment at 34%, Hispanic attainment rate at 28%, and American Indian, Native Americans at 25%. This is the area that we really need to focus our efforts on to continue to increase attainment for these populations.
Ooh, yes, I know. And I definitely have some questions about that, a little later that I want to hit on. But just overall, to sort of close the loop on this 60% goal, why is it important?
It's important for lots of reasons. It's important for the United States to compete globally, to have the talent we need in the US. We need to ensure that we are training the population that we have. We have a great deal, incredible talent across the United States, but we're not educating our population very well. So we need to increase the skills and the knowledge and the abilities of Americans so that they can get these good jobs and have good lives. So for society, we need that. For individuals to have self-worth, to have a job where they feel like they have purpose, so that they can bring home more than a living wage. So they can bring home a wage which allows them to not just work, but enjoy their family and provide, for their families, to participate in, society, to vote, to volunteer. All of those things are necessary. So that's, the main reason I would say that 60% is incredibly important. We're not going to be able to support, the CHIPS Act and these other things that the administration and our government is pushing out if we don't actually have the talent that can do those things. We don't need to be importing our talent from other countries when we have such a wealth of ability here in the United States.
No, you're absolutely right. And that sort of is a good segue here to the report. Looking at the goals that you have of getting the country to 60%, might I even say that it sounds like you guys are going to, you guys, but we as a country are going to reach it pretty quickly. And maybe, I don't know, 2030, you'll have a new goal saying it should be 75% or something. But when we look at, trying to reach that goal and where we are, it brings me to the report that you guys did with the Lumina Foundation did with Gallup, the 2023 State of Higher Education study, which Armin Kaya, one of our writers, was featured on Diverse Education back in February. But anyway, it found that Black students have a lower 6-year completion rate for degrees or certificate programs than any other racial or ethnic groups. And you guys, in the report, it was stated that the outcomes were a result of racial discrimination, higher education costs, and several other external factors. When I look at, we talk about Lumina, you guys have been around since year 2000 and diverse. We started been here since 91. And I look at the outcomes that you're talking about and what the factors are. Honestly, it's the same thing we've been talking about for the past 40 years. So especially when it relates to African-American participation in higher education. So overall, it just seems to be stagnant. So when I look at the results of, this study, in some regards, like I said, it's kind of depressing. So just to get started, what was the impetus for you guys, doing this study of specifically looking at those numbers?
Yeah, great question. So early in the pandemic, people were wondering, well, what's this going to do to higher ed? Everybody, if you remember, the pandemic hit in March of 2020, across the most higher ed institutions, all students went home, or everything was kind of put on pause. And there were all these questions. Well, is enrollment going to increase? Is it going to decrease? What's going to happen? And I remember that summer, everyone was writing articles about it. And, I think it's going to go this way or this way. And so what we decided was we should ask students, what are students planning on doing? And so in the fall of 2020, we partnered with Gallup and we did a poll. We did a poll of current students. We did a poll that included current students who had dropped out, and students who had never enrolled, and said, okay, it's the fall of 2020. Here's your current status. What are you facing? And are you likely to stay enrolled? Or do you think you're going to, enroll if you haven't been enrolled? Or are you going to stop out? And so we really got from the student perspective, the student voice, what they were thinking. And it was really informative to kind of see, what they were struggling with, a lot with COVID and fear of, for health reasons and whatnot. It was such a wealth of information that we decided to repeat the study in the fall of 2021. Did the same study, and we saw some different things. We saw the mental health crisis increase. People felt stressed, and those concerns really shot from 2020 to 2021, and some other interesting pieces were happening. And so we decided we should continue to do this. We're coming out of the pandemic now. We have vaccines and whatnot, so that isn't the number one fear. At the same time, we were seeing from National Student Clearinghouse that enrollment numbers continue to decline. So we see that the fear of COVID has gone down, but people are still not enrolling, and our numbers were not the same as where they were before. So we decided to do that study again this past fall. And one of the things that, as we were doing the study and paying attention to the enrollment numbers, one of the things that troubles us at Lumina, and I'm sure across the nation, is looking at some of these enrollment trends by demographics. So I mentioned earlier that, the attainment rates for Blacks and Latinos and Native Americans are very low. And so we have to focus our efforts on increasing attainment for those populations. Well, we can't increase attainment if they're not enrolling. Right. Can't increase enrollment if they're not completing and succeeding. And so what, we need to do something as a system to help these individuals succeed. When I look at Black enrollment over the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen a constant decline in enrollment for Black students. We saw, obviously a huge drop during the pandemic, but the decline is continuing. In this past fall, we saw that, we're not back to pre-pandemic numbers, but some students are kind of coming back to, I would say the cliff isn't as deep anymore. So it's stabling out. For Black students, it's continuing to decline. So this is a crisis, I think. Like, we have to figure out what's going on here. So understanding that, and then getting data from actual students, so talking to students and saying what's going on, we can begin to uncover. So why aren't Black students enrolling? Why aren't they staying enrolled? And so we decided to take the survey that we did in the fall and do a really deep dive on the Black student experience. So to make a short answer really long, apologize, that's where this study came from. is that it's really important to better understand the Black student experience. What is happening? And then we have to take these results and actually do something about them so that we can better support all students. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, no, it does. It just really got me thinking, personally, honestly, especially when I looked at the outcomes where you're talking about some of the, I guess we'll call them barriers for African-American participation, and one being racial discrimination. And so I have two daughters there in college right now, and I actually called them yesterday and asked, because I was concerned is not the right word, but I wanted to talk to you about the racial discrimination part of this, and wanted to know how you guys quantified or validated that, if you did, or this was just, and I don't mean to minimize, or if it was just taking what students said and going with it.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is taking what students said. This is, their perception. If they're feeling discriminated against, it's not my role to say whether that is or is not. That's, if that person is feeling discriminated and threatened, then we believe that to be truth. And, that came out in these results, the levels of discrimination. So we did augment this with interviews. And those come throughout the report. There's some snippets about some experiences that students felt, because we wanted to put some context behind the numbers. So providing that story, that student voice is how we did that.
Right. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, and I get that. When I talk to my daughters, just to fill in that gap, I asked them the question. I said, I was telling them about the report and what I was going to be doing, and I said, do you feel or have you felt any racial discrimination at school? They both said no, but it was a quick no, and they both followed up quickly with, but I have friends that have, and they gave me a myriad of examples from both their friends. So not that you needed validation, but it did sort of validate, what your report was saying.
Yeah.
And they were, more, I think it was more so with their interactions with other students. And then I asked them, had anybody said anything about staff or faculty? And they, it was lesser, but it was definitely important, because I know part of the, I think some of the outcomes that you were talking about was, that students of color need to see more faculty and staff of color on campus and things like that. So, which is a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But,
so Ralph, can I ask you a question on that? Sure. So do your daughters attend primarily Black institutions? Do they, is it diverse institutions? What kind of institutions?
PWIs.
Yeah.
So they're not HBCUs. And interestingly, to that point, I know my niece, we're going to get personal here. My sister took my niece just this past week to Atlanta to visit Spelman. And has been being recruited by Ivy League schools and stuff like that, and decided that, based upon her high school experience, that she wanted to be in a different environment when she goes to college.
Yeah.
So that's, kind of the debate there, I guess, in their family of where she should go.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see. I mean, the reason I asked is that the results from the survey showed that students feel more discrimination in those least racially diverse schools.
Absolutely.
So in the more diverse schools, they feel less discrimination, but maybe in a PWI, they're feeling more discrimination. Your daughters maybe not, but many students are.
Yeah, no, I mean, to your point, I know, just looking at your bio, are you from Virginia?
I am.
Okay, so which is where we are. My oldest went to Northern Virginia Community College before she transferred to William and Mary. And she goes, I really didn't feel that at Nova because it was just so diverse.
Yeah.
But at William and Mary, she's like, it's not as diverse. And so I feel it and I see it more. And from a racial discrimination standpoint, she said she feels, like she said, she hasn't felt like she's been discriminated against, but she says she feels racial pressure.
Yeah.
you know, like, I don't know, like somebody's looking at me, like, I need to perform, because I feel like people feel like I don't belong here or something. She didn't say those words literally, but that's what I took from what she was saying when she said she felt racial pressure.
Yeah.
Which she didn't feel at Nova, to your point of it being a much more diverse place.
Mm-hmm.
So higher education costs, like I said, those are some of the other barriers. And then you guys talked about some of the other external responsibilities that you found the Black students were encountering. Can you elaborate on what those were?
Yeah, the other ones. So the other thing we found is that many Black students have multiple responsibilities. So we looked specifically at bachelor students. And what's interesting, if you talk to most people, if you stop somebody on the street and you say, tell me what a bachelor student looks like, they think, oh, that's somebody who graduated from high school and they went to college for 4 years and then they graduated and they, went on. And in that 4 years, they probably lived on campus, maybe in a brick building. We know that could not be further from the truth, but that's most people's perceptions. But that's not what today's students look like. Today's students, are working full time. They are supporting families, whether it's an older generation or their own children. And we found this is particularly true with Black students, is that they're facing these multiple responsibilities. So they're trying to pursue a bachelor's degree while at the same time having to work and or supporting children, their extended family, whatever it may be. And so, when the purpose of the study is to kind of say, okay, what barriers are students facing? Why are they stopping out, or why aren't they enrolling? It's not hard to look at this and go, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine having to have gone through a bachelor's program and work full time and take care of children.
Right.
So it's no wonder these students are stopping out, because they're not receiving the supports they need. The institutions aren't helping them, support them to ensure that they can be successful and get through the program.
You just touched on something. So, you said earlier that higher ed through the 40s, 50s, 60s were set up for the elite, if you will. And if you are quote unquote in the elite, you probably don't have those issues you just talked about. So is it sort of just higher ed just right now is not set up to support students, you'd say?
I would say that for the most part, higher ed is not set up to support today's students who are older, who are more socially, racially diverse, who have competing responsibilities. Absolutely not. It is still set up to serve a very traditional age student. And to be fair, like many of the students that attend college, bachelor's degree are between, the 18 to 24-year-old range, but they're working. They have, family responsibilities. And so it is a different population than the one higher ed served, even 20 years ago. And higher ed's going to need to figure out how to better serve these students. They're sending a message for, something these students are able to access, and then they're not delivering on the promise to help them get through it.
Gotcha. Just overall, in your opinion, or from your perspective, when you look at this study, what was your key takeaway from it?
And, these aren't really surprising. We've known some of these things in some ways. What I think is really important is that we have the data, that we see that students are facing discrimination, and this discrimination is getting in the way of them being able to succeed. The levels of discrimination, I think it was like 1 in 4 students, Black students, feel physically unsafe or psychologically unsafe. That's horrendous. And to me, that's a call to action that institutions need to figure out. No student should feel that way, and the fact that 25% of a population is feeling that way is unacceptable. So to me, the data, put it out there and say, there is something we have to do. And there's something we need to do for institutions that are not very diverse, particularly PWIs. How do we think about making a more inclusive campus, a more inclusive situation, so that all students feel like they belong, they see themselves, they see others like them succeeding there. So I think that's really important. The other thing, the same way, is that how can we support the whole student? What policies might we have that are inhibiting students from being successful. So we think about, the multiple responsibilities that bachelor students are facing. Some four-year institutions require freshmen to live on campus. You have to live for your first year, you have to live on campus. Well, if you have a child, you can't live on campus.
Right.
So what can you do there? If you have a full-time job and you have to be like coming and going, sometimes you can't have a car on campus. Like there's some policies that some schools have that are not allowing students to be successful, that are getting in the way. So I think if, one thing that this study kind of pulls together and says, we can't hide from these numbers. These are real numbers. These are how people are feeling, and these feelings are making them not be able to stay enrolled in their schools. And so we have to do something to act to change the trajectory for these students and millions like them.
Yeah, no, you got me thinking, like, pretty much the student you're talking about, the freshman that has a child and wants to live on campus. And if that's the policy, then you have shut him or her out of a lot of institutions, because that pretty much means they would have to stay at home to go to school, right?
Yeah.
And become a commuter student, which then also then would limit the choices that they had as far as institutions. So when I listen to what you're saying and look at the outcomes and the conclusions and all that, we're going to run into a brick wall, obviously, here in regards to the current. It's not new, but the new assault, if you will, on DEI. And by default, when you have these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, some of that by default is going to hamper some of the student success programs that schools have. So when I look at, and I was reading this morning, I think it was in Higher Ed Dive, they were talking about Texas, that University of Houston and Texas A&M, and presidents at these schools have already said, okay, they're now removing diversity from hiring and other programs. So with all that happened at this time, and others will follow, what do you think is going to happen, and how can we fight that?
You raised a really troublesome trend that we're seeing, particularly in a time that we need to ensure that more students of color have access and can succeed. They started out saying, those attainment numbers are, while we're increasing as a nation, we're not doing enough for our Black, our Latino, and our Native American neighbors and peers. I hope the institution puts students first. If institutions put students first, then they're going to care about these students. They're going to provide the services. They're going to ensure that they have access to the institution, and then they can succeed. In the current policies that are happening, may look like that's not possible. But I think many of these institutions do care that they do have an equity component. They do have, equity at their center, and maybe I'm trying to look at the glass half full right now. That if they can't use the words, they're still going to have the services and the practices and the focus on these students to ensure that they can be successful. Right. Colleges are going to have to focus on these students. These are our Americans. These are our future. And, especially with changing demographics and whatnot, these are the students of today. And if we don't focus on them, we're going to fail pretty quickly as a nation, and, move from 14th much further down that line. So I can only hope that, through our work, through work, from others or other organizations like us, through organizations like Diverse, that we continue to beat this drum and say, how important this is, and provide opportunities to show successful programs, successful policies that really can help these students and all students find success in higher education.
Right. You talk about, us, Diverse, you guys at Lumina. Collectively between the two of us, we've been talking about this for over 60 years.
Yeah.
At this juncture, just all the things that have happened, especially, you started talking about, this research that we're talking about was started during the pandemic, and then you had the George Floyd. So we definitely have had a sea change, if you will, in the past 3 years in this country. So, so besides, Lumina and Diverse and others like us who have been speaking up, who else should speak up or beat this drum? I mean, where are we missing the boat, you think?
I mean, everybody needs, policymakers need to beat this drum. We need to see more of it in our practice and policies, and that's policies at the institution level, the community level, and the state level. We need to see more change and more speaking out at that level. I would say, so that I'm not all doom and gloom, and there are some good things we're seeing. When I talked about the attainment rate, we actually saw Black American attainment rate go up pretty tremendously over the last, since the last time that we measured attainment 2 years ago.
Okay.
Like, for example, Black attainment was at 32% in 2019, the last time we ran the Stronger Nation report, and they're now at 34%. So over a 2% increase in attainment, which is huge. That is an incredible increase in attainment. And, that Black attainment has gone up quite a lot over those 15 years also. So almost 10 percentage points in those 15 years, which is good. So we're seeing a really positive trend, and we're seeing an increase in attainment over, higher than the white and Asian population. So there are some positive trends that we're seeing. It's not enough by far. We need everybody to be able to increase tremendously, but we're seeing progress. We just can't let up on the progress. This is why things like the decrease in enrollment has me troubled a lot. Because I fear that will reverse the trend. So, this is a call to action to focus on this enrollment. We have got to do everything we can at the institution level, the local level, the state level, the national level, to ensure that we can reverse that trend, so that we can continue to see an increase in attainment for Black Americans, Latino Americans, for everybody.
Thank you for definitely talking about the positive. I know. I stopped watching local news because I'm like, everything's just bad. I just can't watch this anymore. So I do get caught up in that rut of like negative. So thank you for pointing out the positive. But just back to the question for me in regards to those attainment numbers you're talking about and the drop in enrollment. When you guys talk to the students who had, let's just say, disenrolled or decided not to continue going on, what were their reasonings? And I asked that question, I'm just thinking anecdotally here again. I think that way a lot. I know my father and my father-in-law both told me at different times that they stopped their education because, not that they didn't want it, but hey, I got a job and it was paying me more than I could ever imagine. And that's just how things were. So it just makes me wonder why students, what you found the reason for students not enrolling or disenrolling.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on the number one reason for all students across the board. Financial reasons are the number one reason. I mean, higher ed is expensive. It is really expensive. And in the last few years, especially when people could get a job that is paying as much as they would probably make right out of a degree, or at least feel that way, that they're like, well, this is not worth my time. I have these competing responsibilities and I can get a really good job. And so I'm going to stop out for right now. The problem is that it's short-sighted because there's no growth in those jobs, right? So it might sound like a really good job at 19, but you don't want that same job and that same salary at 51.
Exactly.
So the degree really does pay off. And the fact of the matter is, when we look at who values higher education, we see that like Black Americans and Latino Americans value higher ed more than anybody else. I mean, they absolutely see the value and the importance of it. The problem is it's hard to access. It's hard to access because of cost. They don't have the generational wealth because of, systemic barriers and policies that have existed for decades. They weren't able to accumulate that generation wealth. So getting that job at, McDonald's for $15 an hour is important for their families right then. It needs to become a priority. They can't prioritize higher education, but they absolutely value it. So finances huge issue. We have to figure that out as a nation, ways to get more people to and through.
Right.
The second reason is mental health, as we mentioned before. Mental health is really stress factors are causing people to not enroll or stop out. It's just a lot going on right now. And then, with the Black learners, we found that discrimination and those multiple responsibilities are the other reasons that are keeping people from enrolling. So those together are creating a really challenging environment for so many of our students today to enroll in the first place or even stay enrolled once they begin.
Gotcha. To sort of change subject here, I know we talked a lot here about African-American participation here, but I would be remiss if I didn't, recognize the fact that literally today, not when this broadcast, but today is International Women's Day, and this is Women's History Month. So I wanted you to talk a little bit here before we close out on maybe some of the research you guys have done or what you've looked at, what trends you're seeing as it relates to women in higher ed.
That's a great question. And so just to be honest, at Lumina, our focus when we think about populations is really on racial equity. So we really focus on Blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans. So we don't do a lot of the male, female. That being said, a couple things. First of all, I would say, I talked about the tremendous growth we've seen in attainment since we set the goal until now. The majority of that growth in attainment has come from women. More women are getting degrees. And so we're seeing an increase mostly because of women. Men have stayed more or less flat. And part of that is we see more men in the short-term credentials, certificates, and women have, over the last few decades, because of other policies that have happened, have been able to access higher ed and succeed in higher ed. So that's fabulous. What we saw during the pandemic is more women had to stop out because they had children working at home, because, having school at home. So, all of a sudden they're trying to work or go to school, and their fifth grader and seventh grader are at home with them. And so it was just too much for women to stay enrolled. So the enrollment decreased a bit for women. Hopefully, women will be able to, continue to access, and we'll continue to see large enrollments for women that, outpace men by far in enrollment and completion in post-secondary education. Where we see the problems are once women are done, they're still not being paid the same as men for the same jobs and the same education. So that's where we really need to fix things to ensure that women are able to access in higher education majors and programs that are the higher paying that they're maybe haven't been able to access for years, and that when they come out, they actually have a job that is paying equally, regardless of your gender, your race, or your socioeconomic status, that you're being paid for what you know and you're able to do, not who you are or where you were born.
Right.
So that's where we need to focus on some things. Unfortunately, we have seen male enrollment and male completion suffer the most. And, that has me troubling, especially if I look at men of color, Black men, especially when we see that enrollment decline. A lot of that is with Black men, and we really have to figure out how we can better support Black men to be successful in post-secondary education. That's a real door we have to figure out how to open for those individuals and for our society.
Gotcha, understood. Again, I'm talking about women. So with you personally, what woman has inspired you the most?
So many women have inspired me the most. I would say it's not one. I would start with my mom, a single mom with 2 kids, and never let gender be in my way, and thought, of course you can do it. You want to get a master's? Yeah, you can do it. Your PhD, you should absolutely go get a PhD and try for that. Never put any barriers. Anything was, of course I could do it. And so I would put her. I would also put one of my colleagues at Lumina, who just retired. I think she has greatly inspired me with her generosity of heart and knowledge, and always supporting women. She always is an ally and a champion for her peers and for other women in our foundation.
Now, who's that?
That is a colleague who just retired, Holly McKiernan from Lumina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good deal. I was reading your bio, so I was intrigued that you went to JMU, James Madison University, and UVA. Some would say rival schools. My brother and sister both actually went to JMU, so I know the Dukes well, as they say. So, which one's your favorite?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I actually grew up in Charlottesville, and
Really?
so
Okay.
I was not going to go to my backyard for school. I thought I got to get away. I mean, I went away 40 minutes away, so it wasn't that far. My undergraduate experience was incredible. You talk about women that inspired you. Still 30 years later, those are some of my closest friends, girlfriends that I met at JMU. And they inspire me every day for different ways. And so that was an incredible experience. And then I went to UVA for my master's and doctorate, and they were also ones that didn't, why not get a PhD? Because I talked to somebody about getting another master's, and they're like, no, you should get a PhD. I never thought that would be my path,
Right.
But put no barriers there, and really, set me up for success, and were really enabling and a really great experience. I also have a son at UVA now, and so it's hard to not have that be where a lot of my efforts. And I sit on the board for the School of Education there. So, so my heart is in both places.
No, it's interesting. It's funny you say about your friends and connections at JMU from 30 plus years ago. I would say the same for my sister. She literally just came back from a trip to Miami with, I think, about 10 women that they all lived in suites together during the time at JMU. And they're still tight like that. So interesting.
Yeah. They're the people that support you through thick and thin professionally, and call you out when you're not doing the right thing. And that's important.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And just sort of to close things out here. I know you guys are based in Indianapolis. I'm actually going to be out there in a couple of weeks for a meeting. And then I know then again back in April for some meetings with the NCAA. Wanted to find out from a local, I'm getting tired of always going to, I can't think of the name of it now, the steakhouse there downtown Indy. So what's the best places for food in Indianapolis?
Oh, we have really great restaurants now. I wouldn't have said that 15 years ago, but now I would say some incredible places. There's a whole a street called Mass Ave that has great restaurants that's pretty close to downtown, a whole new area called Bottle Works District. Okay. That I would highly recommend, but you can't go wrong. Some amazing restaurants. Maybe stay away from this. We have a lot of steakhouses.
Exactly.
Not really my thing. But explore some of those amazing restaurants on Mass Ave and the neighborhoods around there, and you will not be disappointed.
All right, Dr. Brown. I really appreciate your time and what you shared with our audience. Just in closing, do you have any last words?
My last words with regards to this report would be, let's not just let it be a report that somebody puts on a shelf. Let's push it out and get people to actually use it and make a change for these students that are so important. It's so important for them, and it's so important for our communities to help them succeed. So my goal, and I appreciate you for bringing this to light again, because the more people that hear about it, the more people that can act on it and actually do something.
Right. It's funny you say that, because I was literally thinking what you said. I said, gosh, this is good information. And, whose responsibility is it to push this or put this in the hands of people that can make a decision? I think I was maybe alluding to that earlier when I was talking about, okay, who do we need to tell? Who needs to know about this? Because we've been talking about this ad nauseum, if you will. So and I will say that some of our partners at HCM will be putting out a report in a couple of weeks called Level Up, where they're really going to put out a call to action and how we can think about Black student enrollment. And, how do we think about that at the local, the institution, the state, and the national level? And so that will be coming out in a couple of weeks. It's called Level Up, and look out for that, because I think that's a way, exactly as you said, put it in the hands of people that can actually need to do something with it. Thank you, Dr. Brown. We will be in touch soon.
Thank you. Maybe I'll see you in Indy in a few weeks.